Hello, welcome to the conversation here on News Central Television. This is the program where we bring you all the latest updates on political happenings on the continent. I am Gbenga Aborowa.
And I'm Rita Omodia. Today on the conversation, we will be discussing the attempts by the African Union to broker peace talks between the Tigray People's Liberation Front and the federal government of Ethiopia as US and EU envoy arrive in Tigray. We'll also be going to Somalia, where an ex-Al-Shabaab leader has been made cabinet minister by Prime Minister Hamza Abdi Bari. And it has become a real sensation on Twitter, talking about the hashtag now from prison to a minister.
Strange things happen in Africa all the time. And we're also looking forward to the Kenyan presidential elections.
Yeah.
A big one happening next week. We'll definitely be here to give you all the details and analysis on that.
Definitely, we will. And right now, let's start with situations in Ethiopia, as US and European Union special envoys for the Horn of Africa have called on Ethiopian authorities to restore basic services to the Tigray region in order to encourage peace talks with rebels. The envoys have just completed their first trip to the region. The officials have expressed support for attempts by the African Union to broker peace talks between the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF, and the federal government after nearly 2 years of conflict.
In a joint statement issued after returning from Tigray's regional capital, Mekelle, on Tuesday, Mike Hammer, the United States Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, and his European counterpart, Annette Weber, also called for services to be restored to the region. Tigray has been without access to phone, internet, or banking services since federal forces withdrew in June of last year, sparking accusations of a government-imposed blockade. Now, joining us this evening to discuss all of this, we have Kassa Gebremichael, a former Ethiopian diplomat. We have Professor Kjetil Tronvoll, a professor and vice rector for research at Oslo New University College and director of Oslo Analytica. We also have Teklai Gebremichael, writer and editor at tgat.com. Gentlemen, a warm welcome to you all, and thanks for joining us on the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to start with you, Teklai. It's been 5 months since the TPLF agreed to a cessation of hostilities, a turning point in the nearly 22-month war in northern Ethiopia following the government's announcement of an indefinite humanitarian truce a day earlier. How has the peace been holding up?
For the past 5 months, which is I think as long as there has been the humanitarian ceasefire, there hasn't been active warfare. There have been skirmishes and there have been some small-scale conflicts. But other than that, war at a full-fledged war at a large scale has been avoided. And I think that's the only advantage that the so-called humanitarian truce has brought about. But in terms of the other fundamentals, the basic blockade on Tigray remains, so that hasn't changed. And the exchange of insults and of other mudslinging hasn't changed. And the suffering in Tigray continues. Basic services haven't resumed, although that was the assumption when they announced the humanitarian ceasefire. The assumption was that humanitarian services like banking and internet and other things that you would consider basic for life were to be resumed, but that hasn't happened. And the isolation of Tigray remains. The designation of the Tigray government as a terrorist organization remains. So 99% of the conditions before the humanitarian ceasefire remain active. So the only thing that has changed is that there has been a trickle of aid. I think about sometimes 100 trucks per day, sometimes fewer than that have been getting into Tigray, nowhere near enough to what is required. But there has been a constant trickle of aid. So active warfare, full-fledged warfare, and a trickle of aid has been achieved.
All right, thank you so much for that submission. You talk about 99% remaining active despite the cessation of hostilities. Now, come to you, Professor Kjetil. Now, talking about the issue of humanitarian situation in Tigray, Now, it's been 5 months. Do you see any difference being made in the terms of humanitarian situation in Tigray? Okay, while we still try to get Professor Kettle, let's hear from Kassa right now. You heard that from him that 99% of things still remain the same despite cessation of hostilities about 5 months ago. So do you think there's been any major difference in humanitarian situation in Tigray?
Well, thank you for having me. First, we have to recognize the humanitarian activities which is underway. But so far, the aid that reached Tigray, they are not able even to distribute it to the needy, to the people. So I could say that Tigray siege is still in place. The only thing that we are hearing is its political part. The Ethiopian government and other donors have tried. The Ethiopian government is using this for its image and to improve its political international relations with the rest of the world. But the people of Tigray are still dying because of lack of medicine, lack of health services, and lack of food. So the quest for the restoration of basic services and for unfettered humanitarian access is still current and very important.
Okay, but Kassa, who would you put the blame on? Is it the Tigray forces or the Ethiopian government? Because we had information earlier when the Prime Minister talked about the fact that most times aid is not being reached to Tigray due to forces blocking humanitarian aid. So who do we put the blame on right now?
It is clearly stated by many of the donors and the non-governmental organizations who are working in and around Tigray. The government, the Ethiopian, it is a policy of the government, first of all, to blockade Tigray. It has a policy to starve and conquer. This is the foundation of its policy. So this responsibility falls upon the Ethiopian government and the international community. If it is to be a part of the solution, it has to put pressure on the Ethiopian government. So I think we have to be clear that Tigray, the Tigrayan people and its forces cannot be against the aid delivery in Tigray. This is really a nonsense accusation.
Thank you, Kassa. I'd like to bring back Professor Trunville. Now, Prof, on the 14th of June this year, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed announced plans for peace process, while Tigray's leadership published an open letter the same day saying it was willing to engage in talks. What are the prospects for these peace talks? Okay, I think while we wait to sort that technical bit out, I'll just direct that question to Teklai. How much progress has been made since the Prime Minister made that announcement?
All right, so I can't really read too much into the joint statement by the United States and the European Union that was issued yesterday. As much as I wouldn't want to sound cynical, but I think from experience, one has to be cynical about any statement that comes from them. So they say in the statement that they expect the Ethiopian government to relent on the blockade. And one of the excuses that the Ethiopian regime gave them was that the reason services couldn't be resumed in Tigray was because the infrastructure was damaged. That banking services couldn't be operational, internet and other telecommunication services couldn't be operational, and electricity couldn't be resumed without the infrastructure being repaired. And the Abiy regime apparently wanted some sort of guarantee that federal staff who would go to Tigray to mend the damaged infrastructure, the so-called damaged infrastructure would be given security protection. And the Tigray government has written a letter to the federal government saying that it is ready to provide safety and security protection to staff. But that assumes that the reason there was siege and blockade on Tigray was because the infrastructure was damaged. But that's not the case. the reason there is blockade in Tigray is because the federal government follows what they call containment policy, isolation policy, by depriving Tigray of basic services, by depriving Tigrayans of access to basic services. They will at some point revolt against the TPLF or against the Tigray government, and that would make them reject the Tigray government and accept the rule of the federal regime. That was the assumption, and it has been expressed publicly many times that the policy, when it comes to Tigray, remains blockade and siege and isolation. So the statement in the joint United States and EU communique yesterday that if the Tigray government was to provide safety protection to start from Addis Ababa, services would be resumed, is on the wrong assumption that was the reason why service wasn't resumed in the first place. So that's one thing that I would like to highlight. But in terms of the end game, as far as Abiy is concerned, even his officials today, one of the regional presidents of the Amhara region, today say that the policy remains the total elimination of the TPLF, that there would be active warfare soon, that they are biding their times, that they are playing with the international community by appearing to say the right thing in public, but by actually doing the planning for war behind the scenes. And an ambassador as well, a couple of hours ago, tweeted that the TPLF must be eliminated for peace to prevail in Ethiopia. So it remains the official policy of the Abiy regime to engage the TPLF of the Tigray government and the Tigray people militarily when the time is right. So they are just playing a gimmick, a trick now to deceive the international community into believing that the federal regime is interested in peaceful resolution to the problem. So again, as I said in the beginning, I don't want to sound cynical, but that is my diagnosis and my assessment of the situation, that nothing is actually going to change, nothing significant at any rate.
Okay, thank you so much. Nothing significant. I'll take it from the last statement you made now, which were comments that TPLF must be eliminated for peace to reign. Now, in May last year, when a similar truce was declared, but fighting broke out a few months later. However, this ceasefire has lasted 6 months without large-scale confrontations. Kassa, what is the way forward? Do you think this sets the tone for an end to the 22-month war, or are we still seeing a continuation of this war going on?
Yeah, on the part of Tigray, my understanding is we want to build on what is achieved so far in terms of humanitarian truce and peace. We understand the problem of Tigray and Ethiopia will be only solved on the table. The resorting to force is not the option for the people of Tigray and for the Tigray regional government. However, peace needs a partner from Ethiopia and from Addis Ababa, in fact. Here, Mr. Gebremichael or Mr. Teklai was saying there is an established policy of the Ethiopian government to eliminate the Tigray Liberation Front or the Tigray government, but the policy goes beyond that. It is to eliminate the people of Tigray. So, having considered the different policies which are so far pursued by the Ethiopian government, the option for peace and the option to have a partner for peace is very minimal. That's why we are calling the international community to make the necessary pressure on the regime of Abiy Ahmed to accept peace proposal which is made by the Tigray government. So the international community, the visit of the special envoys and ambassadors this week to Tigray is very crucial. It helped to Tigray government to clarify its position on peace and on the restoration of basic services and on unfettered humanitarian access. It was important, but we have to judge also, the visit should be judged also by its added value. Have they made the necessary pressure on Abiy Ahmed to restore, as I said, it swiftly? we'll see if they have an added value on the peace process. But Tigray is still determined to continue with peace. This is the foundation of the politics of the regional government.
Thank you, Kassa. I'd like to bring in Professor Trumvo. Now, Prof, the federal government has said, the federal government of Ethiopia previously said it's unable to restore services in Tigray because it is unable to send engineers and guarantee their safety to the region which is under TPLF control. In this statement by the ambassadors of the European Union and the United States of America, they did say that, electricity, banking services, telecommunications should be swiftly returned. And the TPLF leader did say that the Ethiopian federal government wanted a guarantee of their safety. What do you make of all of this, and how much progress do you think has been achieved since the declaration of a unilateral ceasefire?
Well, I think as part of the envoy visit to Mekelle, the regional government of Tigray has issued a written guarantee, a security guarantee for any workforce arriving in Tigray to reconnect, so to say, Tigray, to restore basic services. And I believe that security guarantee is sufficient enough for the federal government to go ahead, if they are genuine in this process, to restore these very much needed services, electricity, telecommunication, banking services, and so on. So that hurdle should be out of the way as is now. So it comes back to the fact that are the parties genuine in their interest to pursue peace by negotiations, or are both sides kind of preparing for alternatives, meaning going back to a
confrontation?
Okay, Professor Trumvo, talking about international pressure, we're seeing the visit now, a rare visit of the United States and the European Union. What do you expect to come out from this meeting? Do you think that there'll be fruitful negotiations from it?
I think the international pressure is
not sufficient enough to sway Prime Minister Abiy or to sway the Ethiopian government to really engage in full in the process. And there are still a lot of ambiguities in the statements issued by the two special envoys and also in the positions of both sides. The Tigray government has put on the table certain preconditions which need to be met before negotiations can start. That is restoring basic services and fettered humanitarian access, territorial control of West Tigray, status quo ante territorial control, and also that the framework for negotiations should be guided by the principles of the Ethiopian constitution, meaning that Tigray should be allowed to hold a referendum on its status in Ethiopia. The two latter points, the issue of West Tigray and the referendum, is not touched upon at all in the statement by the envoy, and it is very, very hard to believe that the Ethiopian government would allow the peaceful return, so to say, of West Tigray under the control of Mekelle. If the federal government will allow that, that will certainly spark a new war between Amhara regional state and Tigray, where possibly Eritrea will also be involved as an ally of Amhara regional state. So we are very far from a genuine peace process as such, but the envoys meeting in Mekelle and the statement is a very small step forward towards possible talks about talks.
Thank you, Professor Trumvo. Now, Teklai, Tigray's leader, Gebremichael, said the parties should meet in Nairobi in keeping with the prominent mediating role for the Kenyan government that Tigray favors. He also alleged that the African Union's envoy for the Horn of Africa, former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo, is too close to the government in Addis Ababa. What are the other obstacles and conditions that are holding direct talks?
In relation to the African... Yeah, but do you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
All right. So I think in connection with the African Union, the problem is that the African Union has been openly supporting Abiy in his war on Tigray. And Obasanjo is an envoy of the African Union Commissioner, and the African Union Commissioner has on multiple occasions said that Ethiopia was doing the right thing in Tigray. So
why do you say that the African Union envoy is biased towards the government in Addis or supporting the government in Addis and not a fair mediator? What are your reasons, Teklai?
So a couple of months after the Eritrean and Ethiopian forces invaded Tigray, for instance, I will give you a couple of examples. Instead of condemning the invasion, or instead of condemning the war, or instead of calling for peace, the African Union Commissioner said that Ethiopia was justified and right to do the invasion and to invite Eritrea. He didn't expressly say Eritrea, but he didn't condemn it either. And it has never taken up the issue of Tigray in the multiple meetings and extraordinary sessions that the African Union had. So Tigray was just shunned to the sidelines as far as the African Union is concerned. There hasn't been even one occasion where the African Union expressed either concern or alarm or even a very kind of superficial interest in the issue of Tigray. On top of that, the African Union envoy, Obasanjo, was the election observer in Ethiopia, kind of a sham election held in June of 2021. And although by any metric, by any indicator, the election was sham, it was meant to give Abiy a legitimacy. Obasanjo said that the election was legitimate, and he has since been friends and mates with Abiy. They're always together. They go on tours across Ethiopia together. So he's openly friends with Abiy. And I think the Tigray government is entitled to say that the African Union has already taken a side in this case. And it would be, it would take a huge leap of faith to believe that the African Union could be an impartial mediator.
Okay,
and that's the reason why.
Sorry to bottom here. You say that the African Union is being quite biased. Do you think that Tigray should be allowed a referendum?
Well, so the referendum is something that is enshrined in the constitution. So I don't think it's something that is up for debate to the extent that Ethiopia is being guided by the constitution, to the extent that the constitution is the law of the land. Then referendum is one of the rights that every region in Ethiopia has. So I think I don't even know why that is something that is up for negotiation, because it's something that is codified in the constitution.
Yes, now Kassa, Tigray has been struggling to cope with food shortages and no access to basic utilities since June 2021. The United Nations World Food Programme has declared it as an emergency situation and one of the worst in the world. What are some of the other humanitarian consequences of this war?
Just to add one point on the previous question on the role of the African Union, we have also preferred several points. First, Moussa Faki, the chairman, has congratulated Abiy Ahmed on December 20 in Djibouti on his military success against the people of Tigray. So this is one important and one crucial point. Number two, the African Peace and Security Council had never put the issue of Tigray on its agenda until 2021 summer. While the United Nations Security Council had discussed more than 11-12 times the issue of Tigray, the African Union Peace and Security had only put on its agenda 1 or 2 times, and it was after 1 year and a half. And this was at the demand of the Prime Minister of Ethiopia when the Tigray forces were reaching the central Ethiopia. So this is one important additional point, that AU is not impartial negotiator or mediator in this affair. Maybe to add another point, the African Union had made a statement just 10 or 12 days after the war had erupted. This was to give a chance for Abiy Ahmed or the Prime Minister to eliminate the forces. They gave him a week, 10 days. So, but even that, the statement was purely, it doesn't ask the Prime Minister or the government of Ethiopia to stop the war. So there are several issues, several points that we have to discuss, and they are in the open. The information is in the open. Tigray is what we called, we are for Pan-Africanism. As you know, the famous Battle of Adwa had took place in Tigray.
Yeah.
So we have this all history. We are committed for Pan-Africanism, and we are also for African solutions.
Now, Kassa, my question on the implications, how ordinary Tigrayans, how are they coping with this humanitarian situation?
To come to that point, I think you understand Tigray is a dark spot in Africa or in the Horn of Africa or in the world. It is a dark spot without electricity, without health. The health services are all scavenged by Eritrean forces. They are looted. There is no education, there is no medication, there is no transport and fuel, and more than 1.2 million people are displaced, and people from Western Tigray are fleeced. So the humanitarian consequence is horrific, and it will be with us for a longer time and period. Not only that, the people are dying every day, but the news, the international media is not reaching these people because of several diseases. Now malaria is coming. We were to eliminate malaria in the past few years, but now malaria is coming. We are hearing epidemics of malaria and other diseases. So the food nourishment, without food, mothers are giving birth to very emasculated children, and so on and so forth. So there is the social fabric of Tigray is being affected.
All right, Kassa, I think there's a whole lot to this humanitarian situation going on in Tigray area. And that brings me to Professor Tronvall now. We've had, the last situation we had was a cessation of hostilities, but we've seen back and forth blame game on why there's been no way forward. Now, Professor Tronvall, is there a possibility that armed confrontations could flare back up? I said, is there a possibility that there will be armed confrontations back up in the Tigray region?
And a possibility of returning to fighting pre the declaration of cessation?
Professor Tronvall, can you hear me? Professor Tronvall, let's hear from Teklai on this situation. Now, we said last we had was a cessation of hostilities, but there's been back and forth blame game. Do you think that fighting will continue? Do you think that Tigray and Ethiopia will go back to armed confrontations?
I'm afraid I have to say yes. The reason is the following. The humanitarians, the cessation of hostilities wasn't something that was enacted in good faith on the part of Abiy. It was enacted because his forces were routed out of Tigray, and he needed a bit of time to reorganize, and he was under immense pressure from the international community. So he needed to take a break because also the Ethiopian economy was on the brink of collapse. So he needed loan, he needed to lessen the pressure that he was facing, but he also needed to prepare his troops to reinvade, or at the very least try to reinvade Tigray. So the cessation of hostilities was a gimmick, and if you listen to the local media in Ethiopia and you listen to local officials in Ethiopia, they make it clear. They don't even pretend to hide what the plan is. They always say that the plan is to to kind of, like I said earlier, to prepare properly and then to re-invade Tigray. So they're playing a game. They're trying to do two things in parallel. On the one hand, sustain the suffering in Tigray for as much as possible so that Tigray could be weakened, so that the Tigray Defense Forces could also be weakened. Because if you weaken Tigray, they have a famous saying they call, in order to catch the fish, you dry the sea. This is something that they repeat almost every day. And the sea is, of course, the people of Tigray, and the fish that they want to catch is the Tigray Defense Forces. So by weakening, by starving the people of Tigray, the calculation is that they will, in the process, weaken the TDF, and it will be easy for them to crush it when the right time comes. But in parallel, they have to deal with the international community, because the international community can't be seen to be ignoring the suffering in Tigray. So by saying the right thing in public, for instance, that they are ready to negotiate, but on the other hand, putting conditions that would be so unacceptable for the Tigray government. So, for instance, they are still occupying Western Tigray, and they will continue to occupy Western Tigray. And they say that that is something that shouldn't even be a precondition for them to leave Western Tigray. And so, war to me is inevitable. They are biding their time, as I said earlier, and the international community knows that. I think that it was disingenuous of them to say in the statement yesterday that they went to Tigray to hear what the other side of the story is. But the Tigray government has been on a continuous basis issuing statements saying that it is ready for peace if the conditions were met and everything. And the international community knew the position of the Tigray government for a long time.
Teklai, let me just bring in Professor Tronville to have the last word before we wrap things up on this conversation. Now, Professor Tronville, Teklai is not very optimistic. He thinks the central government in Addis Ababa is taking the international community on a ride. This is not the first time the TPLF will be in armed confrontation with the central government in Addis Ababa. In the past, they did have a confrontation with the Derg regime. Can you kindly paint us a picture out of this situation? What will it take to have lasting peace in Ethiopia? If you could do it in less than a second and 30 seconds or less than a minute, I'd really appreciate. Thank you.
Well, I'll give it a shot. I think,
now be holding your breath.
I'm also pessimistic about the situation, obviously. The joint statement at the meeting of the envoys in Tigray is a very small step forward. But it is too complicated to solve by not a more comprehensive approach. Abiy Ahmed is cornered by his own party. He doesn't have the full control of the regional government in Amhara, for instance, or how the regional government in Afar will act versus Tigray. It's a peace process. So the envoys and international community needs to broaden their approach when it comes to addressing the key conflicts in Ethiopia. And keep in mind, the biggest war in Ethiopia today is not in Tigray, it's happening in Oromia regional state, and that is not addressed by the peace process we see in formation now. So I think we should be patient, and the pressure to bear upon Addis Ababa must increase, and the pressure on all parties to be included into a more comprehensive peace negotiation process is what might save the day for Ethiopia.
All right, thank you so much, Professor Tronville. Of course, we also thank Kassa for joining us and Teklai Gebremichael for joining us on this conversation. We do look forward and do hope that peace will be brought back to Ethiopia. Thank you so much.
Okay, this is where we switch gears and move on to our second discussion of the evening. In Somalia, where Prime Minister Hamza Abdi has named a new cabinet some 40 days since he took office. But one nomination stood out. He nominated a former member of the Al-Shabaab terrorist group. We'll be looking at all of this and more, the implications when we return from this break. It's still the conversation on News Central Television.